There is a dialogue that I've been waiting to have, but I've been waiting to see if there is anyone out there that would touch on the subject in this particular way that I would like to have it, and I have not. So I've been just putting that off, waiting to see what's out there. And though there are, this content of, this is blasphemy, this is that, no one is really getting to the issue or to the root of what I believe the dialogue should be framed around, and this is around the Book of Clarence. And so what I want to do before I talk about the relation of that movie to the Gospel's main character, I want to play a clip which is going to be lengthy due to me slowing it down for copyright purposes, and then after that just wanting to dive into the nature of this movie, the context and its content, and how it actually is not lying about what the main character of the Gospels, what their act is. So just want to get that going right now.
Jesus of Nazareth.
You can't even buy power like that. I want to be like that in 10 years.
I want to be like that now. Knowledge is stronger than belief.
Clarence, he moved miracles.
I have a plan.
I can see! I can see!
God sent me to deliver his message. I am your new Messiah.
Now, if you notice, what's really interesting is that in this clip, you're seeing somebody that wants to speak to an audience, but he has none. Why? Because of his message. His message is that, originally, knowledge is supposed to be preferred above belief. That's the original message. And in that original message, there's no audience. There's no audience for such a message. Yet, when you see the main character orchestrating a charade, that's when his audience is born. When you see him orchestrating healings, when you see him orchestrating miracles, that's when the bag of silver becomes overflowing. Now, this is important because when we meet him in the movie, he's seeing one called Jesus of Nazareth, and he says, I want to be that now. If this individual has to put on a charade in order to gain individuals for universal regard as a prophet, and he's saying, I want to be like Jesus of Nazareth now, and Jesus of Nazareth now, as he's seeing him, is getting the regard that he wants, it's absolutely fair to conclude that Jesus of Nazareth is conducting the same charade that this individual has in mind. That's the underlying point of all of that, is that without the charade, there is no universal regard. Whether it is in 2024, or whether it is in 26 AD, or whether it is 2,000 years prior to 26 AD, universal regard as a quote-unquote prophet cannot take place without charade. And this is something to point out that the movie does for the individuals we regard in both religious and in secular high positions. That universal regard will not be there for a message of knowledge is supposed to be preferred above belief, but all will fantasize about you once you can manage once you can manage to capture their curiosity through a charade. Now, what that movie is doing is absolutely true. The main character in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John did exactly what that main character in that movie did. A charade of brilliance. And the authors writing Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John actually led us into the fact that their main character is an artist of charades. Looking at the book of Mark 1, 16 to 18. Now as he walked by the Sea of Galilee, he saw Simon and Andrew his brother casting a net into the sea, for they were fishers. Jesus said unto them, Come ye after me, and I will make you to become fishers of men. And straightway they forsook their nets and followed him. Now we really just have to think about why. Why is it that someone who has a particular message that is supposed to be good, when seeing individual people, would walk up to them and say, I will make you to become fishers of men? Why is that tantalizing? If someone had to walk up to me and tell me, I will make you to be a fisher of men, I personally would be like, no thank you. That sounds a bit manipulative. There's a lot of machination in what you're offering. Because it is. In what right mind can anyone walk up to anyone in 2024 or at any time, I will make you to be a fisher of men, and they pick up their bags and say, all right, let's do it. Let's fish some men. What is the connotation behind that? Why is there no thought about what that connotation is? Strip away what you know about the story. Deal with this one scene in this act. You have an individual supposedly coming out of somewhere that we don't know, finding other individuals mending their boats and saying, you're mending a real boat? Okay, so I can help you to mend men so that you can become fishers of men. What does that sound like to you? Like, what is that? That doesn't sound right. And we will see why that's not right and why that should not be sounding right. Because due to our perceptions of what this main character in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John is, we can read that in however we want to read it. But I just want to look at Bible for this, so that we can understand that what that movie is portraying, they're actually portraying, and it's quite valid, the nature of the main character in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. What is a fisher? In Greek, halios, a sailor as engaged on the salt water, by implication a fisher, a fisherman. This individual wants to engage certain individuals on how being sailors and fishermen is beneficial, not for what's in the sea, but for what is in the sea of men. This individual, and when you're hearing this term fisherman, I want you to just think about what a fisherman does. Think about what a fisherman does. So what does a fisherman, or what is a fisher to the Bible? We saw the Greek, Jeremiah 16, 15, and 16, but the Lord liveth, that brought up the children of Israel from the land of the north, and from all the lands whither he had driven them. And I will bring them again into their land that I gave unto their fathers. Behold, I will send for many fishers, saith the Lord, and they shall fish them. After will I send for many hunters, and they shall hunt them from every mountain and from every hill, and out of the holes of the rocks. A fisher is a hunter. What does a fisher do when hunting what's in the sea? In a more technical sense, they bring up what is from out of the water, which now being brought up has no air because they can only breathe under the water. Having no air, they die. Being dead, they are sold for product and food, or for whatever would be the intention of the buyer. That's what a fisher does. I will make you to become fishers of men. I will make you to become fishers of men. The implication there is to what the traditional aspect of what a fisherman is in regard to the philosophical inquiry of how that plays out in real life. The main character of the book of Mark wants to create individuals that will take quote-unquote men up from their location, drown them by the atmosphere they're in, and later sell their corpses. What I'm saying is figurative. Now, how do fishers get their product from within the sea? How do fishers get their product from within the sea? And in the Bible, concerning how fishers move, where is the location that the Bible is placing this at? Looking at the book of Isaiah 19:2-8, I will set the Egyptians against the Egyptians, and they shall fight against everyone against his brother, everyone against his neighbor, city against city, kingdom against kingdom. The spirit of Egypt shall fail in the midst thereof, and I will destroy the counsel thereof, and they shall seek to the idols, and to the charmers, and to them that have familiar spirits, and to the wizards. And the Egyptians will I give over into the hand of a cruel lord, and a fierce king shall rule over them, saith the Lord of hosts. And the waters shall fail from the sea, and the river shall be wasted and dried up. They shall turn their rivers far away, and the brooks of the fence shall be emptied and dried up. The reeds and flags shall wither. The paper reeds by the brooks, by the mouth of the brooks, and everything sown by the brooks shall wither, be driven away, and be no more. The fishers shall also mourn. All they that cast angles into the brooks shall lament, and they that spread nets upon the water shall languish. When we're hearing this term fisher, as verse 8 here breaks down, a fisher gets his product, a fisher gets his work from casting angles or casting nets. Verse 8, the fisher also shall mourn. The fisher is also they that cast angles into the brooks. The fisher is also they that spread nets upon the waters. When we're hearing this term fisher, we are hearing a term used for individuals that cast nets, that cast angles. And in this particular verse, this stream of thought for this class of individuals is held to Egypt, as the author is putting this in there. It is in Egypt where these fishers are casting their nets and their angles. Now, a net is used to trap for the purpose of catching. A net is used for the purpose of catching by means of a trap. Angles are perspectives used to catch minds. Again, the fisher shall mourn. The fisher is them that cast angles. The fisher is them that spread nets. It is in Egypt where we are seeing this message of the fisher, one who is casting nets and angles for the purpose of gathering what they must. And there is no accident, or I should say, it is no accident that the author of the book of Matthew has their narrative tailored for their main character to flee the land of the Jews and enter into Egypt. That's not an accident. It's not an accident because in Egypt there are the fishers. That's why the man said, I will make you to be fishers of men. The narrative in the book of Matthew is a fictional narrative that never took place. That narrative where Matthew 2:13-15, When they were departed, behold, the angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream, saying, Arise, take the young child and his mother, flee into Egypt. Be thou there until I bring thee word. Herod will seek the young child to destroy him. Verse 14, when he arose, he took the young child and his mother by night and departed into Egypt. 15, and was there until the death of Herod. This never happened. This scene never happened. This is fiction. And I will now say it is historical fiction because I will show you the history of where this scene actually comes from. After concluding his war successfully, friction between Jannaeus and the Pharisees soon turned to violence. In his capacity of high priest, while offering the water libation on the Feast of Tabernacles, his manner of officiating offended the Pharisees to such a degree that the crowds pelted him with the citrons which they carried in accordance with one of the customs of this festival. They assailed him with loud cries and charged him and his ancestors with being ineligible for the priesthood. To make matters worse, Jannaeus used his foreign mercenaries to put down what he saw as a revolt, killing some 6,000 Pharisees and their supporters by some accounts. Later, returning from an unsuccessful expedition against Obedas, the king of the Arabs, he found his people, incited by the Pharisees, armed and arrayed against him. The ensuing civil war cost the lives of no less than 50,000 Jews. The Pharisees, meanwhile, unwisely allied with the Seleucid king Demetrius III against Jannaeus. Jannaeus first retreated, but then managed to prevail thanks to popular support against the Seleucid invasion of Judea. His most cruel act was the execution of 800 captured Pharisees by crucifixion in one day. This deed is rendered still more horrible by fact, if it is not a legend, that he caused the wives and children of the condemned to be slain before their eyes, while he, surrounded by feasting courtiers and courtesans, enjoyed the bloody spectacle. The remaining Pharisees now fled the country in fear, 8,000 of them emigrating to where? 8,000 of them emigrating to Syria and Egypt. Yes, in history a slaughter happened, a great slaughter happened. Yes, in Egypt a great slaughter under a Herod happened. Yes. In history, this Herod in question is not the historical Herod. Herod is here used as a title meaning oppressor. Whoever is a Herod is an oppressor. The Herod in question is Jannaeus, king and priest of the Hasmonean dynasty, who conducted a slaughter against the Pharisees, which Pharisees then fled to Syria and then to Egypt. Pay attention to where this history is pointing to, because a slaughter undoubtedly happened, and it undoubtedly happened under a Herod, and Herod is here undoubtedly used as a title for an oppressor. But the Herod in question is not the historical Herod who slaughtered many. Yes, he got it out. But it wasn't in this fashion. This never historically happened from the literal Herod. But the event happened. So that's why I said, this isn't simply fiction, this is historical fiction. Historical fiction in that the authors writing Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, they are manipulating historical events to create a fantasy fiction world for their main character. Their world never took place. They're using history as a backdrop to create events surrounding their main character. They know more. They know more than what they are letting on, or they know more than what we would think. Because their main character is a fisher, yes. He's a fisher or a hunter. He has this mindset. A mindset that the author of the book of Isaiah links to Egypt because he is from Egypt. Not born there, probably. He had to flee there, most likely, due to some sort of catastrophic event. And a slaughter fits perfectly, because that's the history there. It is in this land that he became a fisher. And it is from out of this land that he returned back to the land of the Jews to conduct an assembly of fishers. Such as have this title of fisher, they're using nets, they're using angles as traps for perceptions. The gospel writers understand that their main character is a fraudulent artist conducting a charade. They understand this. Their readers won't, because their readers, they don't know, they don't have this backdrop in clear. And the readers are going into the scenes and the act and the script with an idea of what the main character is. So what the actual content of the script is will naturally be overlooked due to the impression that the authors want to place onto their readers. In Janaeus, that king, you can say, lived around 103 to 76 BC. In that time period, that's when this slaughter happened. So the person that we're reading about in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, they're not who we think. Their character isn't what it actually is, even though there are context clues given by the authors of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John to let us know that their author is fraudulent and has gained notoriety through fraudulence, which I will give some verses to show that. Now, who in the Bible can we say are hunters? Looking at Genesis 25:27, the boys grew. Esau was a cunning hunter, man of the field. Jacob was a plain man dwelling in tents. Genesis 10:8 and 9, Cush begat Nimrod. He began to be a mighty one in the earth. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Wherefore it is said, even as Nimrod, the mighty hunter before the Lord. Now some will say that this before the Lord, due to language and context, means against the Lord. So Nimrod was not a mighty hunter before the Lord. Nimrod was a mighty hunter against the Lord. Now this may not be the actual case due to the Lord that is there mentioned. Because Nimrod was most definitely a hunter for the Lord. He was. But he was also most definitely a hunter against the Lord. He was. The historical backdrop of what Nimrod is, or what Nimrod represents, it's a backdrop that we get from the Bible and the cities and all that is therein, but just want to read. The historical backdrop of the figure Nimrod is furnished by an enumeration of cities either dominated or built by him. Most of the tophonyms offer no problem to the interpreter. Babel, Akkadian, Babilu, Erech, Akkadian, Uruk, and Akkad all lie in southern Iraq, the heartland of the ancient Mesopotamian civilization. These three cities, each with historical roots well into the 3rd millennium BC, were part of what was known in cuneiform texts as the land of Sumer and Akkad. The biblical text informs the reader that the three cities, all of them, according to an emendation of the Hebrew text supported by an ancient Samaritan interpretation, were to be found in the land of Shinar. Other biblical texts make it clear that Sinar is a designation of Babylonia, that is, southern Mesopotamia. So when we're hearing that, and I have this quote here to point out that when we're hearing of Nimrod being a mighty hunter before the Lord, that's valid. That's completely valid. Being a mighty hunter before the Lord means being the one, being that voice for, being that face for. Nimrod had a Lord that he was a mighty hunter for. And in the same sort of context of hunting, as is in the book of Mark, I will make you to be fishers of men, I will make you to be hunters of men. Same sort of context. But he was also a mighty hunter against a Lord, against the Lord. So Nimrod, and we understand this because the history points to his legacy, his name around the Mesopotamian area. It is through these Mesopotamian religions and all of their aspects of them that Nimrod is there at the center. At the center. Nimrod is there at the center, being a hunter for the deity at that center. Yet he is also a hunter against the mind from which he supposedly came out from. He's a hunter against the mind at the heart of the scriptures. I'm pointing this out for Nimrod, and Esau also was a cunning hunter, and he also has a story of manipulating his own self and suffering great loss for that manipulation. But I'm highlighting here Nimrod because this Nimrod also fulfills what we see in that main character that is a fisher. The main character of the Gospels is a fisher himself, or is a hunter. He's hunting not for the mind at the center of the scriptures. He is not hunting for the mind at the center of the scriptures. He's not hunting for the mind at the center of the Jewish scriptures. He's not hunting for the mind at the center of the scriptures at all in general. He's hunting for a mind of a particular deity known only to himself. Known only to himself. And you can see some verses here, but you can see as you go through Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the charade for which he is parading about his relation to this deity of his that is only familiar to himself. And there are many instances that the Gospels give us, and there are many patterns that the Gospels show us that this individual orchestrated his miracles, that this individual orchestrated the perception that his environment should have of him. And again, bearing in mind that this individual that is orchestrating the main character of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, we are reading an act. We are reading an act just as the Book of Clarence. If the Book of Clarence was 2,000 years ago written into a book, it would just be that. We are reading of an act, just as we saw the trailer of an act. We're reading of an act. And the main character in this act is no different than the main character in the act from the trailer that was shown earlier. If you go to the book of Mark 9:23-25, Mark 9:23-25, Jesus said unto him, If thou canst believe, all things are possible to him that believes. Straightway the father of the child cried out and said with tears, Lord, I believe, help my unbelief. When Jesus saw that the people came running together, he rebuked the foul spirit, saying unto him, Thou dumb and deaf spirit, I charge thee, come out of him, enter no more into him. Now, in this scene, you can see he's healing someone. Before this father came to his disciples. The disciples couldn't do it, so now he must be called upon to do it. Only he can do it. And the backdrop is that he's entering into this scene, rebuking the energy therein. And the energy that he is rebuking, it could not have been done by his disciples, but it only could have been done by him, but not immediately. It couldn't have been done immediately. Why not? Verse 25 tells us, when Jesus saw the people came running together, he then acted. Only when eyes are on you, only when eyes are on him, you act. If you want to be a fisher of men, you need to have eyes on you. If you want to be a fisher of men, you need to act when you see that there is activity engaged towards your direction. If you want to be a fisher of men, you have to be able to move when you know that the people will move with you. This could have been done immediately, right? We're believing that this is, as Mark, in the author of the book of Mark, in their first verse of their first chapter, that this is the Son of God. This is the Son of God. This should have been done immediately, right? Like, do it immediately. Why are you waiting until people run to you? Do it immediately. Who cares about the notoriety, right? Who cares about the eyes? But someone will say, well, you need faith in order to heal, right? He needed to have eyes that would give the energy of faith so that his Father could move for him, because he's not separated from his Father. So he needed faith. He needed the faith in order to move and to act. Sure, that could be something, but if you go back from Genesis to Malachi, all of the instances of things happening in a miraculous way, there's no waiting. There's no eyes. There's no initiative for audience. When Elijah healed, he healed. When Elijah commanded, he commanded. When Elisha parted, he parted. When he healed, he healed. When things happened, they happened. There was no need for an audience. But you get to Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and there is a pattern. And I'm just giving this one instance, but there is a pattern consistently of where eyes are needed, where audience is needed before you act, if you should be called a prophet. Looking again in Mark chapter 2, 1 through 3. Mark chapter 2, 1 through 3. Again he entered into Capernaum after some days. It was noised that he was in the house. Straightway many were gathered together, insomuch that there was no room to receive them, no, not so much as was about the door. And he preached the word unto them. And this is the next verse. Right after he says that he preached the word unto them, and they came unto him, bringing one sick of the palsy, which was born of 4 now. There's a pattern in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. There's a very consistent pattern in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, where after preaching some mysterious word that the authors do not articulate to their audience, after preaching a mysterious word that the authors do not articulate to their audience, a mind-bending act must occur afterwards. There is a pattern in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John that after a mysterious word is taught, or before a mysterious word is taught, a mind-bending act must follow. A mind-bending act must follow, and to the point that the reader, the audience, never knows what the main character of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John is actually teaching, but only knowing what he's done. Why? Why is it that there is no consistent philosophy of what the actual man taught, but there is a consistent portrait of scenes for what was done? Mark 7:35-37, straightway his ears were opened, and the string of his tongue was loosed, and he spake plain. He charged them that they should tell no man, but the more he charged them, so much more the great deal they published it. So much the more a great deal they published it, and were beyond measure astonished. And what did they say after being astonished by what he has done? They said, he hath done all things well. Now what was the all things that he did well? Was it knowledge that he gave them? Do they remember his words? Did he impart to them something that they can carry within themselves in practical daily life? He had done all things well, they said. He maketh both the deaf to hear and the dumb to speak. There is a pattern in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John that after every supposed preaching of a supposed philosophy, a mind-bending act must follow. Why? Why must a mind-bending act follow what is preached? Why is it that you need to have coupled together with what you are saying some sort of miracle? Why is it not that words were spoken and he pushed on to the next city and words were spoken? How is it that so conveniently, the pattern is very consistent in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, after every word is spoken, a word that the reader and the audience actually does not know, a mind-bending act takes place. If you want to be a fisher of men, if you want to sell what you're saying, make sure you include it. Make sure you couple it together with some sort of mind-bending act. Now remember, in the land of Egypt, the association of fisher, in the land of Egypt, the magicians there, they did exactly everything that Moses did. You remember that? Everything that Moses did, they did it. The art that is in the land of Egypt, the art of being a fisher, is the art of manipulating instances familiar to the audience. And manipulating instances familiar to the audience in regard to what a perceived or to it a perception or a perceived perception of what they are viewing is. If you can do this correctly, you will have, as it says in the book of Mark, chapter 1, all men run to thee, all men seek thee, all men look for thee. And it will only be noted that the all that you have been doing is healing, is doing this and is doing that, is doing this and is doing that. You're fishing. That's the art of fishing for men. One can say that, sure, he wants to fish to give what he taught. Okay, if that was the case, we would know what he taught in the narrative. If that was the actual case. If it was the actual case that the individual wanted to conduct an assembly of individuals as fishers for purposely and purposefully putting out a philosophy that would be beneficial, we would actually know what that beneficial philosophy is. Instead of saying, as they say, commandment 1, keep all the commandments of God, commandment 2, love your neighbor. That's nothing. You don't need anyone to tell you that. There's no knowledge of what this individual taught from a practical philosophical sense from Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John within it. We can imagine. That doesn't mean that that's valid imagination, because there's nothing, again, that this individual taught, despite the author saying that he preached the word, that is memorable. If this individual was placing into the atmosphere a memory of a philosophy, that would be included in the narrative, but it's not, because it's not important. It's not important because what he did is. What he did is important because what he did is what got him the fame. The charade put on, and you can actually see, again, there is a pattern of charade behavior from Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John of their main character that the authors give us. The authors are letting us know that their main character, he's not what we think. Their main character has a history in Egypt, most likely. It is in Egypt where he learned how to be a fisher. And we also have to remember that in this time, there is in Egypt a deity called Christ. Serapis Christos. In this time, of which we are assuming Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John is to be taking place in, of which it did not, but we are assuming, there is a deity long existing called Christ. And the individuals attached to that deity's church, you can say, they're called Christians because they worship the Christ who was Serapis. This individual ventured, most likely, author of the book of Matthew is not putting that in there by accident, into Egypt. This individual understood the relation in Egypt by the father of Egypt and by the son of Egypt. Yes, they existed. The father of Egypt, the son of Egypt, the father God, the son of the father. That was all in this time period. In Egypt, this individual became a fisher and entered into the land of the Jews with a conflicting philosophy. Not in support of himself. Not in support of himself. Because the individual in the book of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, essentially, John's questionable because at that point in time, the philosophy changed and a lot took place in those churches. But the individual in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John did not believe himself to be the Christ. He was actually a messenger for the Christ. He was a messenger for that Son. That's why he's always saying, as it is written of the Son of Man. As it is written of the Son of Man. The Son of Man was not present to give himself. Sorry, the Son of Man was present to give himself a ransom and a sacrifice. He's speaking in third person because he's not that man. As it is written in the scriptures of the Son of Man, this individual has scriptures that the audience doesn't know about. His Son of Man is coming from outside of scriptures familiar to the audience. We can't, dismiss history for the point in time in which these things are assumed to be taking place in. There is a Christ already in existence. A Christ born in Egypt. This individual went to Egypt. Again, that's not an accident from in the book of Matthew. Went into Egypt. Learned the art of fishing. Came back home to dispense the art of fishing. And the authors of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John allow us to understand the art of fishing that this main character employed. We will never know what he said. We will never know what he said. But we will always know what he did, because the focus is supposed to be on the act and not the knowledge. The act is a charade. The Book of Clarence is right. There's nothing wrong with what is in the Book of Clarence. The Book of Clarence is telling us exactly the fact. If he's seeing Jesus of Nazareth having so much adoration and he wants to be that now, and the only way that he can think to get it is through charades, it is because he is witnessing, even though the audience may not see that, but he's witnessing in his world, in his environment, in his atmosphere. He's seeing more than what his audience is not seeing, than what they're seeing. Jesus of Nazareth conducted charades to get the universal regard that he did. He had to. Clarence is saying, if I have to do this to get it, and I want to be like that, the perception is that the one that you want to be like has also done the same. And so what we've done is just go into the Bible to show that. There are more examples, of course, but Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John pinpoint instances of where their main character is setting up scenes and activities for a charade, only moving when things are right. And when I'm saying when things are right, only when moving when there is an audience. Only when moving when there are eyes. Setting up scenes and things. Whether it is by miracles and doing things, or whether it is by after giving a speech, after talking. Coupling together what is said with a mind-bending act to sell himself further. These are things and instances that are within Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John that you can't really ignore once you study the pattern that the narrative gives you. And this movie, Book of Clarence, it's spot on with what the actual reality is. Universal regard as a prophet, whether that prophet is in the secular world or whether that prophet is in the religious world, it appears and can only take place only through charade. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, their main character is putting on a charade when we can see the act, when we can see the actor, and when we can see the pattern that these authors give us for such a charade, well, then we will be able to see that this individual is actually not a valid prophet, that this individual is actually, that they are writing about a false prophet. And the Gospels no longer look like a work of art promoting an individual. They actually look like a work of art downsizing the character of such. Reverse making fun of someone is what this is now looking like, or what it actually is in reality. And what we are celebrating, taking these things as fact, or taking these things as whatever our imagination would want them to be taken as, we're actually celebrating a fraudulent actor.